In 2001, a real-world exercise tested the emergency response to a bioterror attack on the continental United States. The operation was called Dark Winter. Within just a few days, the simulation spiraled out of control. The operation predicted a rapid breakdown in essential institutions, civil disorder, and massive civilian casualties. Dark Winter has revealed how vulnerable we've become. Our lifestyle, our security, our safety depends on a delicate and unstable economy. We've created a system so complicated that we no longer understand how to control it. Oil, power, shipping, transport. We live in a complex world. And the more complex it gets, the more fragile it becomes. The system is built on a global supply chain that gets things where they're needed, just in time. We've created a house of cards. Remove just one, and everything falls apart. And what's fueling this system?
Money.
Following Black Friday, retail's busiest day of the year, a number of people began getting sick, and it was spreading incredibly quickly. Initially, the symptoms were mistaken for a severe case of the flu. However, when people started dying from it, medical personnel quickly began investigating and eventually discovered that it seemed to be an outbreak of the previously eradicated smallpox virus. To combat the outbreak, the smallpox vaccine was distributed to the public, but unfortunately, the vaccine was quickly proven ineffective, and devastatingly, things were about to get a whole lot worse. The city's infrastructure was starting to break down, hospitals were becoming overloaded, and the New York police force was struggling to maintain the peace. A number of gangs of rioters were starting to carve out their own territories within the city. Eventually, the government assembled a new line of defense, hoping to help maintain order. This group was composed of the police, firefighters, civil volunteers, and the National Guard, and they were known as the Joint Task Force. Their job, to stop the spread of the virus and uphold order within the city. The plan was simple. All known infected individuals would be relocated to the center of the city, separate from the uninfected. And in order to stop these people from leaving and mixing with the public, a large wall would be built around the quarantine area. This way, the spread would be contained, and they would be in a better position to get the appropriate personnel and bring them in directly to where the help was needed. But eventually, the situation got worse, and more than what the JTF could handle. One of the private military contractors brought in to help keep the peace, known as the Last Man Battalion, cut ties with the JTF and started taking control of parts of the city for themselves. And on top of this, there were a number of other hostile factions starting to rise, like the Cleaners and the escaped convicts, known as the Rikers. This is when the first wave of strategic Homeland Division agents were activated. Their goal, to assist the JTF and regain control of the city. Unfortunately, it was too late. Shortly after the first wave division agents were released into the Dark Zone, the government and the JTF pulled out, leaving behind supplies, medicine, weapons, thousands of infected, and the first wave agents. Abandoned and cut off from the outside world, many agents succumbed to the virus or were killed by the growing hostile factions within the quarantine zone, the area that would later be known as the Dark Zone. The first wave of division agents were labelled as MIA and presumed dead. As a result, this is the event that triggered the second wave to be activated. Their goal was to investigate what happened to the first wave and assist the JTF in restoring order to New York City. The commander in charge, along with the majority of the second wave agents, were being flown in by helicopter to assemble themselves just outside the hostile zone. But as they landed, they were struck by an inbound missile, which caused the helicopter to crash, killing everyone on board. It was now down to just a handful of remaining SHD agents to carry out the mission. New York City was in a horrific state, and there were a number of rumors on how the rest of the world wasn't doing too much better either. Hostile factions have sectioned off part of the city, fighting for territory. There were the Rikers, who had escaped from the prison on Rikers Island. They took advantage of the dwindling prison staff who were either sick or no longer turning up to work. Once on the mainland, their goal was to wreak as much havoc as possible on society, the society that had them locked away, especially authority figures like the JTF. Other groups weren't necessarily born out of hate. The cleaners came about with the best of intentions. They were among the thousands of civilians left behind in the dark zone when the JTF pulled out. These were the workers that were helping the JTF and keeping the city infrastructure ticking along. Construction workers, sanitation, janitors, garbage men, truck drivers. They were also heavily involved with the construction of the quarantine zone wall. But when the JTF suddenly packed up and left, these civilians decided to take it upon themselves to do what was needed to contain the virus and restore order to the streets of New York. And the way they decided to do this was to burn everything that had been in contact with the virus. Contaminated items, the bodies of those who had died, and anyone living that may have become infected. The LMB, or Last Man Battalion, are a private military contractor made up of US military veterans. They were hired by large Wall Street companies wanting to protect their assets. The LMB worked alongside the JTF to start with, but as time went on, they watched the city go from bad to worse. Sick of the indecisive local authorities and the government's complete lack of ability to control the situation, the LMB decided it was up to them to restore order to the city. They broke their contract and cut ties with the JTF, executing an officer in the process. From here, they proceeded to do what they deemed necessary to rectify the situation at hand. Second wave agents eventually found that the source of the virus outbreak came from New York department store Abel's, and that the man responsible was a Dr. Gordon Amherst. Their mission was now to locate Amherst and find out what he knows in order to develop a cure. However, the second wave was also about to make another revelation, as it was discovered that the first wave agents weren't all dead. In fact, a lot of them were very much alive, and now working against the government. They had gone rogue. After the government pulled out of the quarantine zone, the first wave agents were unhappy with how things had been handled by the JTF and the government. And this is where we're introduced to a prominent figure in the division storyline, Aaron Keener. Aaron Keener was a first wave agent who, after the abandonment of the quarantine zone, became disillusioned with the government, its plan to save the city, and his role within the division. Keener disavowed the division and went rogue. His first action after turning against the government was to recruit other first wave agents into his new focus of survival and power. Any agents that refused were killed, causing other agents to cut communications and go into hiding. After forming his group of rogue agents, Keener met up with the commanding officer of the Last Man Battalion. They agreed to collaborate through a deal that would benefit them both. Keener wanted to use the LMB to assist in operations to establish dominance over Manhattan, and the LMB wanted access to the division SHD technology to gain advantage over the other hostile groups. Keener, with the LMB, launched many operations against the opposing groups, including the JTF. The most notable one being an attack on a helicopter that was carrying a division commander that was in charge of the second wave of division agents. During his time working with the LMB, Keener was also investigating the virus outbreak. He found that Dr. Gordon Amherst was responsible. Keener's investigation led him to Dr. Vitaly Tronenko in the Russian consulate, who was also researching the virus. He organized some of his rogue agents to kidnap Tronenko and his research. Keener then found Amherst's lab, as well as some virus samples, a 3D printer, and Amherst's notes. His plan is to use Tronenko and the samples to weaponize the virus, and use it to fulfill his belief that only those who are smart enough and good enough survive. The old rules, laws, and governments are gone. Now, only power and survival matter. It was at this time that Amherst was found. Shortly after the outbreak, it was discovered that Amherst had fallen to his own creation. Notes and recordings detailed why he did it. His reason for creating and spreading the virus was that humanity was too powerful on a global scale, and that Mother Nature needed a help in advancing her creations. Mankind is the greatest threat to the survival of the planet through their own greed, but he had the cure. Amherst also had a Darwinist point of view. Only the strong deserve to live, and his creation is the tool to ensure that this happens. But at the same time, he is willing and accepted that his death may come from his own creation. He was able to modify the basic smallpox virus by combining it with several other dangerous diseases like Ebola and H1N1. On top of this, he also modified the genetic traits that controlled the incubation period and made it so that it could spread even while it was incubating in the host. This made it particularly lethal because by the time that the host was showing symptoms, it had already spread to a significant number of others. Using a protein printer, Amherst was able to create the final form of his virus just in time for Black Friday. His plan was to spread his new virus via means that were most handled during this shopping holiday: money. Hence the name, the dollar flu. Slowly, the second wave division agents and the JTF were able to push back the hostile factions and regain control of the city. The Rikers and cleaner leadership was taken care of, crippling their advances. The LMB were pushed back into their final stronghold, located in the United Nations building. During the lengthy battle, Keener betrays the LMB and escapes with Trinenko and his fellow rogue agents. The LMB is left to slowly be taken apart by the division agents. It was later discovered that Keener had spent some time on the West Side Pier. At this stage, all hostile groups had feuds against him, most of all the LMB. He broadcasted his location to bring all hostile factions to this area to hunt him down, which in turn brought the JTF and the division, whose distraction helped keep the hostile groups from finding him. He also taunted the division agents, stating that no one will ever find him, and despite the quarantines and lockdowns of the island, he'll soon be gone. It's now confirmed that Aaron Keener is long gone from Manhattan and New York City altogether. There is confirmation that Keener is or was in Washington, D.C., but he continues to leave messages for the JTF and other government agents to convince them of his ways and beliefs, and to join him and his agents in working against the government. His final message was to inform the division that his eyes are not just set on the United States, but now the world. Seven months have passed since the green poison outbreak and the events that unfolded in New York City. Division agents had continued on with their mission of saving what remains across the United States, when suddenly their lifeline was severed. The SHD network, the backbone of their advanced technology and communications, goes dead, quickly followed by the backup protocol of a distress call that summons all agents to the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Agents from outside of DC make their way to the capital. Fighting through the city, they come across what remains of the city's joint task force, who have set up their base of operations in the White House. SHD coordinators on site fill in the agents on what is happening throughout the city. Three hostile factions are fighting for control. The Hyenas, a group that is composed of several gangs who have come together as one under the leadership of a council to take advantage of the chaos that is unfolding. The Outcasts, a group made up of the survivors from the Roosevelt Island quarantine zone. Their goal, to enact revenge on those responsible for their mistreatment and to the society that allowed it to happen. And the True Sons, a powerful group of ex-JTF who have lost faith in the government's ability to bring control to the situation at hand. The division agents get to work finding the fault to restore the SHD network, but before they can achieve this, new information comes to light. Somewhere in the city, there may in fact be a cure to the virus that started it all, but also that the previously assumed dead President Ellis may have survived the crash of Air Force One. While clearing out the areas throughout the city, the agents find intel on Ellis's whereabouts and that he's being held captive by the Hyenas. The division managed to clear the hostiles and extract him via helicopter. Back at the White House, Ellis confirms that there is in fact a cure, but not just for the green poison, but all viral infections. However, he is unable to access it without his briefcase, and this was on Air Force One when it went down. The briefcase was in possession of the True Sons, and they were holding it in their HQ at the US Capitol building. President Ellis ordered the agents to do what it takes to cleanse the city of these hostile forces and return his briefcase. However, the division wasn't strong enough to be able to tackle this challenge just yet. First things first, they located the fault in the network and restored power to the SHD and their agents. From here, they set forth clearing the hostiles and pushing them back to their respective strongholds. Upon removing the hyenas from the District Union Arena, the outcasts from Roosevelt Island, and then the True Sons from the US Capitol building, the division had now eliminated all hostile leadership, leaving the factions in a state of disarray. But also, they had Ellis's briefcase. While the agents in the JTF celebrated their progress towards regaining control of the capital, a force that had been lurking in the shadows suddenly made themselves known. The technologically advanced private military company called the Black Tusk launched a full invasion of the city. Landmarks and strategic points throughout the city were quickly brought under Black Tusk control, and it was during this time that President Ellis suddenly disappeared. It was revealed that the Black Tusk had been watching the progress of the dollar flu outbreak for some time, including the actions of the SHD. Division agents found out that it was this new hostile force that was responsible for the SHD network being taken down, and that they had been planning this invasion since the outbreak first occurred. The Black Tusk had, in very quick succession, completely undone all of the progress that the division had made up until now. Unwavered, the agents, against all odds, once again fought through. It was discovered that President Ellis had actually handed over the antivirals to the Black Tusk, and that they had been working together, and in fact had something to do with the death of the last president that had him put into power. The antivirals were being held at the Black Tusk Tidal Basin headquarters. The agents launched an attack and managed to fight through the technologically superior forces, regaining control of the antivirals. Washington DC is once again in a state of mayhem, with the three hostile factions, although without their original leaders, fighting for control, and a now new, more powerful faction attempting to establish a new dynasty to lead the country into a new era. President Ellis has been located. He is found to be hiding out at the presidential retreat, Camp White Oak. Under heavy guard by Black Tusk forces, the JTF and the division assault the compound in an attempt to arrest Ellis and bring him back for questioning. Unfortunately, before they could reach him, he managed to escape. His whereabouts are currently unknown. The division agents then turn their attention to the Pentagon. They have received a transmission from an agent close by. This agent was scouting the DARPA labs to see if they had succeeded in developing a perfusion bioreactor. With this device, they will be able to produce large quantities of the broad-spectrum antivirals and start to distribute them across the population. However, they weren't the only ones looking for it. A large Black Tusk operation was underway. They were attempting to dig down through the Pentagon and extract the bioreactor. But the division agents managed to put a stop to this, in turn killing dozens of Black Tusk officers. The perfusion bioreactor is now being kept at the White House, along with the broad-spectrum antivirals. The next step towards creating the cure requires the agents to find someone capable of running such an undertaking, someone with experience in this field. The division receives intel on the whereabouts of a former agent who is at the top of their most wanted list. Aaron Keener has finally resurfaced after disappearing months ago, last seen in New York City. Keener has made a deal with the Black Tusk unit that is stationed on Coney Island. He is planning on trading Vitaly Tronenko in exchange for a favor that he'll call upon at a later date. Tronenko is a virologist that had ties to the creator of the dollar flu, Gordon Amherst. The division saw this as a great opportunity. Keener is the man behind countless deaths of JTF and SHD agents, and the leader of the initial rogue agent uprising, and Tronenko would be the perfect candidate to run the bioreactor. The situation was too good to let slip by. Aware they could be running into a trap, the division launched an operation to rescue Tronenko and capture Keener. Despite heavy Black Tusk presence, they managed to extract the Russian scientist. To their surprise, an old foe had joined the fight, the cleaners. The Black Tusk suffered heavy losses at the hands of both the cleaners and the division agents. They were forced to retreat. A distress call was received from the division command in Lower Manhattan. City Hall has been attacked. Agents from Washington, D.C. make their way to New York. Through video surveillance, it is found that a group of rogues, led by Aaron Keener, were the ones responsible. The attack left the building completely destroyed and contaminated by a new unknown virus that Keener had acquired from Vitaly Tronenko before they parted ways. The hunt for Aaron Keener was on. The division agents set up a base in a local settlement called Haven, where the local commanding agent, FAYE, got to work compiling clues on Keener's whereabouts. With all that had happened over the last few months in New York, with the countless, once loyal agents going rogue, faith in the division was at an all-time low. Agents would have to regain the trust of the remaining population if they were to succeed. One by one, the agents located and eliminated Keener's rogue lieutenants. Through each encounter, they found new clues and intel on Keener's whereabouts, including his plans to reset society. Keener had set himself up on Liberty Island. His plan was to launch a ballistic missile that was filled with his new weaponized virus on Manhattan. The agents board a ferry and make their way to Liberty Island, but before they make it there, they are attacked by the Black Tusk, who have also learned of Keener's location and are trying to get to him before the division does. They sent ground forces to stop Keener, including a Marauder-class quadcopter, warhounds, and a Razorback missile launcher. But the division agents managed to push through and overwhelm their forces. It was now just the agents and Keener. Even with his new, more advanced SHD tech, Keener was no match for the division agents. They managed to destroy the missile launcher containing the virus and heavily wound Keener. He escaped to the pier, but his injuries proved too much. The division agents caught up to him, and before they could stop him, he activated something on his watch, something he called his legacy. With his dying breaths, he laughed at the agents, telling them that they have no idea what's coming, before dying shortly after. It was at this time, broadcasted through Keener's watch, that the division discovered that the acting commander of the division in New York, FAYE, had gone rogue and was working with the Black Tusk. Before Keener's death, he had organized an attack on Washington, D.C. Rogue agent Jupiter was given the task of carrying this out. Jupiter assembled her team of rogue agents and equipped them with the new Rogue Network smartwatches that Agent Theo Parnell had developed alongside Keener. While on mission, Jupiter would receive a package. Keener had sent her a sample of his new weaponized Eclipse virus. But with Keener now out of the picture, she had it disposed of. To her, this operation was about getting rid of the virus, not spreading something far more dangerous. Jupiter and her rogues have teamed up with the cleaners for this mission. She informs them of multiple reports of experiments being carried out to weaponize the virus in DC, and makes it very clear that the goal is to eradicate the green poison and anyone who could be spreading it. Following the path of destruction, division agents would eventually catch up with Jupiter's rogues and take them out one by one. It was discovered that Jupiter was on Roosevelt Island, uncovering a newly developed EMP technology from a cargo plane that had crashed there some time ago. This tech was capable of neutralizing all non-rogue network SHD tech, including the agent's armor. Her plan was to recover all the tech and dispatch it out to rogue agents nationwide, rendering the division completely helpless. By the time division agents caught up with her, the cleaners had set up a solid foothold on the island and were preparing to use it as a staging point for their mission of cleansing Washington, D.C. of the virus by burning it to the ground. But the agents were too much for them. The cleaners were pushed back. Even after Jupiter had them utilize the new EMP jammers against them, they fought through, killing the cleaners, the EMPs, and eventually Jupiter. Rogue Agent Hornet had history with Keener. They served together in the US Army, long before they were recruited by the division. Hornet saw them as brothers and would do anything that was asked of him. During Keener's attack on Lower Manhattan, he gave Hornet some of the Eclipse virus, along with instructions of how to create more. On top of this, he tasked Hornet with going to Washington, D.C., along with 4 other rogue agents, to recruit members to his cause. The outcasts were the most likely solution, as they were currently without a leader and in need of a purpose. But Hornet's rogue agents weren't exactly the most subtle in their movements. Division agents had no problem tracking them down and eliminating them, eventually exposing his location at Tidal Basin. Hornet did his best to organize his new outcast recruits and get his supplies of Eclipse virus moved out of the city. But the agents were pushing through the compound too quickly. Hornet attempted to slow them down by releasing some of the virus around the base. However, it was too late. The agents were able to clear the outcast forces, and then Hornet and his stockpile of Eclipse virus. Black Tusk Specialist Leader Barden Schaefer has been tasked with working alongside the recently turned rogue, FAYE. She has provided him with 4 rogue agents, but he is having his doubts, and shares his concerns with Black Tusk leader Natalia Sokolova. But Natalia shakes it off, saying that this is an opportunity for FAYE and her rogues to prove their worth, as well as keeping her business partners happy. She orders Schaefer to handle the responsibility, as it was him who brought FAYE to the Black Tusk in the first place. During the operation, Schaefer continued to receive unreasonable requests from these rogue agents, until he eventually decided it was time to contact FAYE. They would end up organizing a meeting on Coney Island to discuss the operation and growing expenses. In the meantime, Schaefer's rogues are being hunted down by the division, with the assistance of someone or something that refuses to stop and talk, and instead opts to disappear after each encounter. From the outside, the Schaefer and FAYE meeting appeared as a setup to kill FAYE, but regardless of what it was intended to be used for, the SHD agents would soon crash the party before anything was able to go down. They would invade Coney Island, rapidly working their way through the Rikers stationed there, and meet face to face with the entity that was responsible for helping with hunting down the rogue agents. This asset, or operative, would be taken down by the agents, but he seemed to be known by Schaefer and Natalia. In fact, he seemed to be working with them. The agents would turn their attention to Schaefer. After engaging with some of the most elite BTSU in their ranks, agents were able to catch up with them, and after a short firefight, Schaefer would become severely wounded. Eleni Kelso would send in a team to retrieve and apprehend him. Agents finally discover intel on FAYE's whereabouts. Given her prominence within the agency, her actions in turning her back on the division make her more than just another rogue agent target. For the agents, this is personal. After taking down her team of rogues, they would find out that she is at Camp White Oak with President Ellis. But by the time the agents get there, FAYE has assassinated Ellis and is attempting to escape the compound via helicopter. Blaming the division for Ellis's death, she is surrounded by a large contingent of Black Tusk forces. Before she is able to leave, the agents catch up with her and disable her transport. FAYE is now forced to engage in a fight against the agents she once worked so closely with. FAYE would eventually be killed by the agents, but after her death, they would discover that not everything was what it seemed. Audio logs left by FAYE would explain that everything she has been doing is for the greater good of the division and the country. Her plan was to gain trust within the Black Tusk and work her way up through their ranks, to put herself into a position where she could take them apart from the inside, and her first target was President Ellis. She needed everything to look authentic. It needed to appear as if she was just another agent defecting from the division. So for this reason, she couldn't let anyone know what she was doing. On top of this, she was working closely with Barden Schaefer, who had lost faith in the direction the Black Tusk was headed. As Natalia's #1 man in the BTSU, he holds a large amount of intel on what Natalia and her partners are planning. But for now, he is still in a coma from his engagement with the division at the end of Season 3. When the JTF was assembled in Washington, D.C., Captain Lewis would be placed under the command of Colonel Antoine Ridgway. When Ridgway stopped taking orders from above and started taking matters into his own hands, Lewis was one of the soldiers who would stay loyal to his cause, rebranding themselves as the True Sons. After Ridgway's death at the hands of the division, General Anderson would take the reins. Anderson would eventually have Lewis carry out an operation in D.C. They were hunting for something, and have now found it. Lewis and his men head to the Jefferson Trade Center immediately, and this is where the division would catch up with him. Except he is all alone, the last member of his team. Lewis would explain that there is something much larger at play here, and regardless of their differences, they should team up to bring it down. Although they don't necessarily trust him, the agents agree. The division, along with Lewis, get to work taking down the Black Tusk who have taken hold of the site. While in there, Lewis warns the agents that the BTSU are not the biggest threat present on site. There is something far more dangerous, something he calls the Recruiter. Agents eventually take down the Black Tusk forces. The Recruiter, having done nothing but observe from a distance throughout the fight, would vanish shortly after. However, to add to this confusion, the agents would also find out that the Black Tusk soldier who was commanding this operation had an agent watch on him, with Isaac detecting an agent status. The agents pushed Lewis for answers, but he would simply tell them to get in contact with him when they had finally caught up with what was happening around them. This operation also reveals and confirms the cooperation between Natalia Sokolova and Calvin McManus. McManus turns out to be the Secretary of Homeland Security, and that he is his own personal unit of covert special operatives, known to us as the Hunters. Being Homeland Security, McManus is not only aware of the SHD from its very early days, but is somewhat responsible for them. Following the mission at Jefferson Trade Center, General Anderson has come to the realization that the True Sons are no match for the Division or the Black Tusk, so has reached out to Natalia Sokolova in an attempt to team up. Natalia sends out a team of Black Tusk operatives to assess and work out the viability of this new potential alliance. However, in the background, Manny and Lewis have been communicating. Prior to more recent events, Manny and Lewis worked alongside each other in the JTF, all the way up until the day that Colonel Antoine Ridgway turned his back on the government after losing faith in their ability to do what was needed to make it through this pandemic. The JTF around Ridgway were faced with a choice: to fall back to other JTF units, or to join his new band calling themselves the True Sons, in turn becoming an enemy of the country. Manny fell back, keeping to his oath, while Lewis sided with Ridgway, agreeing that things needed to be done differently if the country was going to survive. However, now, after Ridgway's death, although Lewis still feels that what he did was justified, under Anderson, things have now changed, and he wants to help put a stop to Anderson and Natalia's plans. He has managed to find at least 100 True Sons so far who are willing to follow him and team up with the Division to take Anderson down. But unfortunately for him, Anderson and Natalia are onto him and have been watching for a while, waiting and preparing to see how this plays out. After the Division had finished dealing with Natalia's Black Tusk operatives, who were sent to assess the True Sons, agents would discover General Anderson's location at the Pentco Fairview power plant, where he had a meeting planned with Natalia Sokolova. But he isn't the only one there. Other than the hordes of Black Tusk, Natalia and Anderson have now acted on their suspicions around Captain Lewis. So Lewis and his men have now been captured. This mission is now more than just about apprehending General Anderson. This is a rescue mission. The soldiers that Captain Lewis had been preparing for transfer over to the Division have been rounded up and either locked away or executed. Running through various challenges, including EMP jammers that were set up in the laboratory and rising steam pressure in the cooling tower, agents would make their way to the reactor. There, Lewis had been locked away in an office, while BTSU operatives activated a failsafe, setting the building on fire after deactivating the fire suppression system. Division agents were successful in turning on the valves and reactivating the sprinklers, rescuing Lewis in the process, but with little warning, Lewis took off in pursuit of Anderson. However, Anderson had already made it to the docks when Natalia had arrived with hovercrafts. The agents would meet up with Lewis in the parking lot, where a helicopter was waiting to extract them.
Agent Kelso to Captain Lewis.
Go for Lewis.
Need confirmation. Is Anderson in your custody?
Negative. The Black Tusk have the general.
I'll send a team to intercept.
No, negative. It's not worth the risk. There's a fleet of Black Tusk hovercraft. This fog is the only reason why your extraction team is still breathing.
How well do you know Natalia Sokolova?
Not that well. I don't think anyone does. We've only met once. She was not what I expected.
Thank you and your boys for the assist. I look forward to working with you now that we're partners.
She looks like the president of the PTA, but you can tell she's dangerous.
Now there is the slight hiccup that the division took the plant. But I'm not concerned. They've most likely moved on to their next assignment.
Nothing she does is random. She raises her eyebrow at dinner in Monaco when you're hearing about an assassination in Tahiti. You should never underestimate that woman.
We'll regroup and take back what is rightfully ours.
And?
My true sons are at your disposal and ready to follow your orders.
Excellent. Let's get to work.
So this is a somewhat summarized picture of the Division story as of the end of Year 4 in the Division 2. But for anyone interested in more detail, I have links to many other videos in the description. I'm actually still working on a full, detailed video around the story, but this is sitting at around 4 to 5 hours long and I'm far from finished. So with other projects going on, I have no idea how long this will take me to complete. Although the Division have managed to stop a number of the Black Tusk operations and have captured or killed a lot of their leadership, up until this point, it has barely slowed their movements. And then there is the organization behind the BTSU, being led by Natalia Sokolova. While the Black Tusk have all the troops on the ground, it is this organization who is calling the shots. The Division themselves are in a bad place at the moment. Most of their agents have either been killed or have turned rogue. Those who still remain loyal to the SHD may too be flagged as rogue after the assassination of the president, who up until this point was one of the last remaining officials of the old government. And then there is Calvin McManus, his hunters, and Barden Schaefer, who may have all the information the Division needs to push forward. But as of now, he's still in a coma. Year 5 is looking pretty good, with another 2 games coming out that could be feeding into the overarching story from a couple of different angles. Before I go, a big thank you to all of my channel and Patreon members. Anyone familiar with the channel will know that I don't do a particularly good job of pandering to YouTube and its rules, as they often hinder the creative direction I like to take. So I often find my videos being demonetized, age-blocked, and heavily restricted. Your above and beyond support definitely keeps the channel alive. From my family and I thank you very much. Otherwise, I hope everyone enjoyed this video, and Extremis Malus, Extrema Remedia.